here. First of all, Dr. Kenneth Swansea. Dr. Swansea, please come take your seat here in front. Dr. Nila Hidayat. Dr. Nila, please come forward. I would like to invite Madam Pamela Rivera. Madam Pamela, to please come forward. And Dr. Abeliana. Dr. Abeliana, if you're here, please join the group. And for this focus discussion group, we will have Dr. Leroy Rupati to facilitate the discussion. Dr. Rupati, let's give them a round of applause. Dr. Rupati, give you time.
Once again, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a valuable time this morning and noontime. And we will conclude our seminar today through a panel discussion that centers around disruptive innovation. But before we start, Dr. Lila has to leave early because she has a flight at 8 o'clock to catch. And, you know, traffic is not, not that friendly going down that road. So perhaps she will have to leave a bit early, about maybe 3:35, 3:40. So before we, I think we will give her a priority in the discussion about disruptive innovation, particularly in tourism. So today she presented on some of the models for tourism, sustainable tourism in Indonesia, and a few of key points that came up. And I think is a driving force going forward is homestay. Yeah? And she presented a case about homestay in one of the village in Banten, and it's very interesting. Now, and core to that is participation. Core to that is participation. And as part of participation is education. Could you explain in more detail what are the dimensions of education as part of innovation that is key towards the success of a program, especially in a sustainable program through homestay? What are the dimensions of the education?
So thank you very much for the questions. Well, I think a little bit or briefly is already explained before by Dr. Fram that actually the innovations or disruptive innovations also, well, all the sectors actually, get the effect of the disruptive innovations, right? Even currently the educations, could be considered about, as the sector that also could be collapsed by the disruptive innovations. But however, because the question is in relate with the program of CSR, I think it's almost similar of the concepts of education or institution in almost all the world, that educations have to deliver three pillars. Education itself, teaching, learning, and then the second is research activity, and the third is CSR. So I think education supposed to support, the communities, including many programs, like in my case is homestay program, how, we could contribute, giving some innovations, giving some, bridging some concept on how they are going to develop or bring their own lifestyles become a very good business model that's very attractive to be over to the market. I think, well, if we can say people, at least in my countries, at least in, isolated area or region, they are still far away from, the knowledge, a very, adapted knowledge is from the innovations. So I think, it's a part of responsibility of the educations to bridge the gap in terms of innovations. So bringing the idea by helping them, shifting, I think once again, the core concept is how to shifting the mindset. when the mindset is aligned with the innovations concept, then it's going to be much more easier for the education to help them bringing, or approaching a good concept or business model toward or to improve, their business or their program. I think that's my answer.
Thank you. If we're gonna bring that concept into a more practical level, what dimensions do the homestay practitioner, let's say the locals,
Yeah.
have to understand as part of the education process for them to be able to actually make the program work? I mean, we can come up with, homestay is an excellent innovation. I love it.
Yeah.
I love the idea, and I love the idea that it has to be bridged through the academic world, etc. But unless it is approached holistically, then it's a recipe for failure, from my point of view. So what are all the dimensions that they need to know as part of the homestay process that the government, if you like, or the NGO needs to pay attention to? That can be an area that the participant have to learn to be able to be a successful homestay practitioner, if you like.
I think, once again, we cannot avoid from the core concept or core dimensions of the sustainability itself, which comprise of three elements or three dimensions, which are the economic, socials, as well as the environment. So again, we have to bridge, this kind of three dimensions within the educations in the simple way, of course, it's not in the higher level, toward the communities. They have to understand that, by balancing the environment, the nature of environment, and changing into the valuable economic and socials is not that hard, or is not, that challenging if we get a commitment, if we get a collaborations. But again, the dimensions that you have asked actually is related with the three dimensions concept in the sustainability. So I would prefer that those three dimensions, like how to bring, their mindsets, understand well toward the environment, toward the socials, toward the economics, will bring a very good impact to increase their welfare.
Thank you. You mentioned about economics, so I suppose the concept about financial sustainability has to come into place. And we understand that a lot of times small scale or micro, if you like, business faces difficulty in the workplace, in the industry, in terms of financing. Because the financial industry have stringent rules in how they are going to actually extend funding. But and you mentioned about collaboration, cooperation, mentoring, if you like, with partnering that will help them develop. And of course, there may be other dimensions in their practices, for example, quality assurance, that needs to be addressed. You mentioned about education; it can come from the government. Earlier, you mentioned it in your presentation, and also from NGOs. Is there anything that you would like to add to the topic that we were talking about? For example, you mentioned about innovative destruction. What other ideas that we can actually bring into tourism with innovative disruption concept? Anyone? Go ahead.
Okay. In the academe, today's students' retention is really short, and this also disrupts the classroom setting in terms of lecture, in terms of how it is being engaged with the students. Now, in relation to the industry right now, this is my dilemma now. If the millennials today would really have this a longer patience, or something that they could really do, the demands of the industry, because in my experience of teaching since 2002, today's generation of learners are really not so patient enough, okay, to listen and critical think what the teacher's doing, or what the teacher's imparting knowledge. Now, my dilemma now is how could the students be able to sustain their value of the demands of the work in the industry, because when I have only for what an hour to our lecture, they are not anymore attentive to me. So in other words, in this innovation technology today in the academe, we are also being taught and aware how to really put emphasis on the students' participation. Like in in FU Manila, it's about SEL, students and learning. I only talk 20 to 30 minutes, and the rest all the students will do the critical thinking, engagements. They do the role playing, etc., and they have to read and read so many journals or books, and this may be a way of putting or emphasizing about um, getting rid of this disruption in the technology. I mean, it's about the new approach of the students today. I cannot say before 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was a student, I cannot say it anymore because it doesn't apply. So in the academe, the same also with the mind setting, with Dr. Lily mentioned. Mind setting here is about approaches on how to be really engage with the students more, because the industry is so demanding.
Thank you. You brought the application of technology into academia. I would like to go back to Dr. Lila in terms of technology. Now, we have Grab, Uber, non-traditional way of transporting people, which actually have adopted technology. Now, how have that innovation influenced the traditional way of doing business, especially in the tourism industry? We're going to go back briefly to Dr. Lila.
Talking about disruptive innovations in Indonesia, I think the new wave of the disruptive innovations in Indonesia starting in 2010. Once the young persons, millennials that time, Nadiem Makarim, he just less than 25 that time, 2010. Then he comes with a brilliant idea, changing all the business model, and then of course become the threat for other traditional or conventional transportation, public transportations, which also including that is the Bluebird, the leading brand of the cab operator in Indonesia. I think you know it well, yeah. And from 2010, 6 years later, Gojek, that's the applications of the transportations online, become the unicorn of the Indonesia. We're proud of that. And the benefit of the concept of business model that happened that time, it goes to the consumer, particularly facing the traffic, the gridlocked in Jakarta. Wow, it's crazy. No one can survive it. But Gojek comes with a good, benefit for the consumers, even though in other sites it comes or it creates, the chaotics, the biggest chaotics involving over than 12,000 employees from the reputables, cab that time has happened. In 2016, when even the Gojek's raise or changing become the unicorn, with the valuations less than 10 years. Can you imagine a small startup business, like you consider small, medium enterprises? He, at the beginning, wasn't bring a very big capitals in terms of finance. But of course, the finance coming from the overseas investors. But I think the point is how, all of us could consider the disruptive innovations as an opportunity rather than as impediment, as a constraint. So I don't think if many people here still consider that disruptive innovation as impediment, so it's going to be disasters. And including the government, how we deal with that, I think it's role of the government is also critical. With us, the government also try to, comes with the solutions in this dispute by issuing, the regulations like, the problems or the dispute is coming from the traditional cap is because the Gojek as the initiators comes or against the regulations, because in current regulation at that time, those who can serve as a public transportation are those who've registered as a public transportation services, but not with the Gojek. And within this, regulation, the bridging, the involvement with the government, issuing the policy, then everybody could accept, including in the tax, aspect, because they don't get any tax at all, So I think, again, it's not become the threat, but it is a part of the, challenge or impediment.
And so, can you clarify now? The government have a regulation in place to regulate the app-based transportation mode. Okay. Just as an information for everybody, here in the Philippines we have the motorcycles that can take you to places. In Indonesia, they came up with an application platform where you can order these services. And it's similar to Uber, but this is on motorcycle. So it's called Gojek. So it's the same idea, but applied to motorcycles. Last question before you go.
I'm sorry.
Last question before you. How have it impacted the tourism? Has it improved the movement, mobility of tourists around the country?
I think the traveler is a part of the consumer. As long as, bringing the benefit, I believe that the tourists also going to love it. It's quite simple mindset as it is. Bringing the benefit by speed up the process, the time, making an efficiency in time. It cannot be avoided. A part of the tourism industry, but not transportation, is a Traveloka. Traveloka is also establishing, the platform of the e-commerce, and they are very successfully also being a part of the unicorn, a second unicorn in Indonesia. Gojek now is transformed, become Decathlon. The valuation is increasing double from $1 billion change into 10 billion, again in less than 15 years. And now followed by another application in Traveloka, which related with the tourism. And I do believe it is also boost up, the economic benefit or impact to the tourism sectors. So again, the challenge is changing or shifting the conservative or traditional business model into the newest business model, which involve technology, which involve, creativities from all the young people or generations, including the millennials, I believe.
Wonderful. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Lila.
Thank you.
We thank you, Dr. Lila, for your...
I do apologize that I have to leave.
We thank you for being here and sharing with us.
Thank you very much.
And we wish you well as you travel back home.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you again. Thank you very much. Thank you. All the best for you. Thank you very much.
Okay, shall we continue our discussion? Now let us trace back to Dr. Swansea. Dr. Swansea is one of a great guru in strategic management, in innovation. Really, my 2 years being here have taught me that I've learned a lot from him in that short 2 years of interaction with him. So I would like to go back to you. And could you talk a little more? Give us a good foundation of what is innovative, disruptive, what do you call it?
Disruptive innovation.
Yes.
Okay, very good afternoon. I hope all of you are alive and awake after a good lunch and a break, and we are having a good session here. The question is, how do we understand disruptive innovation? The concept of disruptive innovation was first coined by Clayton Christensen. I do not know if you are familiar with him. Anyone, have you read about disruptive innovation from Clayton Christensen? Any of you? I don't see too many hands. But Clayton Christensen, an American thought leader, conceptualized innovation. And he said that there are 2 types of innovation. One that actually perpetuates the present business model as the primary way of doing business. And then he said, well, there are other types of innovations that actually disrupt an industry. And he gave an example. One of the good examples that you can see is Air Asia, the airlines Air Asia versus Singapore Airlines. Now, before we get into the example, let us try to define what is disruptive innovation. Clayton Christensen defined disruptive innovation as a process by which a smaller company with fewer resources is able to successfully dislodge a market leader. Okay? So what is disruptive innovation? Is a process by which a smaller company with much lesser resources is able to challenge the market leader. Now, how is a smaller company with very few resources able to challenge a market leader? Clayton Christensen said that this is possible by 3 ways. One, offering a simpler product. Number 2, offering a cheaper product. And number 3, offering a more accessible product. Now, this can happen through technology, technological innovation, or like Ma'am Leela mentioned, it could be by offering maybe the same product, but using a different business model. Or it could be by tapping a latent industry, a latent market. Now, these are the 3 ways. Now, let's see how AirAsia was able to challenge Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines represented premium flying experience. It offered great connectivity, hub and spoke, any destination could be connected. Number 3, it offered a full gourmet, meal. But if you really look at, and which was a great flying experience. I've flown Singapore Airlines, a great flying experience. But most of the customers who fly don't really value all of this. Some of the flights are 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. You don't need a gourmet meal. And many of the tourists are flying with just 1 bag. And so what AirAsia, and by the way, Tony Fernandez has an Indian origin. I think the Indian mindset came into the picture. They said, there are more people who are willing to fly without 5 baggage of suitcases. They're willing to forego a gourmet meal, and they're willing to fly point to point instead of hub and spoke kind of a flight where you have multiple destinations. You can do multiple destinations, but on many tickets, flying point to point. And like they say, the rest is history. AirAsia, with very little resources, was able to dislodge a market leader that was AirAsia. Now, this concept can come into play in tourism industry too. It can come into play in the education world. It can come into play in the entertainment industry. It can come into play in the retailing industry. In the retailing industry, you remember, I do not know if some of you would remember, Sears Roebuck used to be one of the biggest stores, expensive, well-known store. It was disrupted by Walmart that offered very cheap products, not much of customer service. But Walmart itself, which was a disruptor, was disrupted by Amazon, who didn't have a physical store and offered a different business concept through technology. Now, Walmart is also being disrupted now by smaller industries, smaller retail shops like Aldi's. I was just reading about it. In the tourism industry, you have large hotels like Sheraton. You have, what are the big hotels? Expensive hotels. Yes. Marriott hotels. You can name some of these big hotels. This is being disrupted by what Ma'am Lilia described as homestay. You know, there are a lot of tourists. They don't want to stay in a Marriott hotel. In fact, millennials want to pack a bag and go sleep out somewhere, and they want to interact with the locals. They want to discover, well, the world is like large car rentals like Hertz. What are the other? Evis? Yes. Large car rental companies offered car rentals with a chauffeur-driven, those chauffeurs wearing gloves and, a cap. Now, who wants that? I would want transportation from point A to point B, and at the call of my, cell phone. And that's how Uber, Grab, and other things came into being. Now, these are disruptors. Now, looking into the tourism industry, medical tourism is a disruptive innovation. And homestay is a disruptive innovation. And Airbnb, how many of you have booked your hotels through Airbnb? I think almost everybody would have. And it is such a pleasure. And very soon, some of these disruptors will not only successfully challenge the market leaders, but they will be displaced. Likewise, in the education industry, here in IS, if you're not careful, online schools, MOAC, use of online platforms that you just mentioned, like Canvas, Moodle, that would disrupt land, building, library kind of education institutions like we have today. And so, Dr. Leroy, the world is waiting for the next disruptor. And here, when I see all of these young people, I feel that many of them would create businesses that would disrupt the incumbent. And like what Ms. Leela also said, disruptive innovation is not a threat. It's not a challenge. In fact, the call today is to be a disruptor. And we can disrupt the disruptors themselves. Create business models where we can disrupt the disruptors themselves. So the call is not so much on how do we deal with these disruptors. Now that is reacting. There are call to be disruptors. Create business models that can disrupt.
Thank you, Dr. Swansea. Let's give him a big applause. I mean, the idea about innovation is an idea that always amazes me because, an organization, a company, an institution will stop growing unless they innovate. I mean, everybody's moving forward, and if we do not innovate, we are walking in, and we are a dying organization. So basically, our organization looks for innovators, yeah? And disruptive innovation is an excellent concept. Now, in the Philippines, Ma'am Rivera, what can you think or can you share with us what are the possible or what type of disruptive innovations, or maybe not disruptive, like what you said, there are two types of innovations. One disrupts and one sustains it, So it could be a sustainer or it could be disruptive. But in the Philippines, what innovations do you see? It could be both. That is actually influencing the tourism here in the Philippines. And is it doing good or bad to the industry?
For me, as part of the academe, as I observe in the hospitality industry, one of the, if we are comparing to other Asian countries, so one of the disruptive innovations for me is the technological innovations. Even though the hospitality industry still evolves in between the human interactions and between the technology. Soon, the hospitality futures is a combination of human touch and high tech. And we all know that in the Philippines, we have to be competitive with a local international market. We all know that in several Asian countries, in terms of technology, for example, like in Marriott in China, they already have the facial recognitions check-in. They just have, I just watched a video about the facial recognition. So maybe they are millennial and they are just do the online booking through their cell phone. Then after that, they go to Marriott Hotel. Then they have a machine. Then the machine recognize the face of the person. Then they just have to get the key card already without the human interactions. Here in the Philippines, for us, we have to improve our technology also so that we are not left behind. Okay? And even in Japan, they already introduced robotics or artificial intelligence. Okay? They already have robots who are concierge, robots who are server. Okay? But of course, the human interactions should not be lost because that is hospitality service. Okay, but another thing is some of the hotel also use an Internet on Things that you can have the room service and the one who will deliver that also is by use of the machine. And for us, for the Philippines, to be able for us to cater or to be more competitive in the international market, we also have to improve our technology, even the Wi-Fi connectivity. So compared to other Asian country, we have not that low, but we have not that good Wi-Fi connectivity, and we all, even you as millennial or as hospitality guests, even experience that. There are certain tourist destinations that there is no Wi-Fi, that there is no internet, and we all know that some of the guests is always looking for Wi-Fi, always looking for internet. But again, as I said, while all of the hotel is doing this technological innovations, as mentioned earlier by Professor Kanzi, that the Filipino is still good in terms of giving good quality service, because we all know that in the cruise ship industry, we are still the Filipino have large number of employment. So that is partly on the part of the tourism industry. But for me, in terms of the academe, it's not a disruptive innovation, but it is a challenge for us to let our students be qualified and competitive in the international market or local market, especially when the Asian integration is already implemented, that we need to teach our students several competencies for our in several competencies to several subjects such as baking, culinary, and there are 243 competencies so that our graduates are competitive and to be accepted in an international employment. We are not only, we need to prepare our students not to be hired in the Philippines only, but also in the international market because of the so-called Asian integration. So that's one of also, so we have to improve more of our curriculum so that the partly the innovation or any other disruptive challenges, our students can face it immediately. But for conclusions, as much as possible, we don't have to forget, we need to balance and create, the hospitality companies, the academe need to create a balance between technological and, of course, human interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Rivera. I like what you said. We need to create a good balance in between technology and human touch, because it's a hospitality industry, and If it becomes fully automated, then it's no longer hospitality, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I think I agree with you. We need to create that balance where human touch, because it cannot be replaced. Yeah, we can improve efficiency through the use of technology, but human touch, judgment, the ability to pass on affection, sympathy cannot be replaced with automation. Anyway, you'll be last. medical tourism even medical tourism is a new concept. Uh, at first, I have difficulty of trying to embrace the idea that it's a tourism, because people go to another place to get medical treatment. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. So we'll allot the last slot to you. We're gonna go to Mr. Ephraim, yeah, Ephraim. Now, you mentioned in your presentation about fourth industrial revolution. Can you talk a little bit more about that? The fourth industrial revolution, because we have the third industrial revolution that talks about digital technology, and now we are moving towards how it is being used, it's being applied. Now, can you talk more and see how it can be applied? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing?
Okay.
Is it disruptive or is it a sustainer?
In the perspective of a teacher for 17 years, fourth industrial revolution is about mindsetting or shifting of paradigm of my approach to the students in terms of maximizing the use of technology. And it's good enough that FU is very, very ambitious in terms of innovations in teaching. And this fourth IR, as I've mentioned a while ago, this is a particular about what the student-centered learning engagements where we focuses on the innovation using Canvas. I've been to other schools for the last 70 years, but FU has this concept of globalization of education for the students. That's the at the end of the day, it's always the students are our client, our stakeholder. In other words, this fourth IR revolution about innovation is now ongoing with FU. Unlike I have so many friends all over the Philippines because I am part of the core officers. Tomorrow's our general membership meeting in Pampanga. It's been I'd be so proud of the university because other universities don't have Canvas. In other words, this fourth industrial revolution about technology enhancement or innovation, where we teachers in this university need to maximize, need to share, need to impart, need to engage with our students. And I would say this is not really a disruptive one because it's about enhancement of our engagement with the students. This may become disruptive if the teacher is not religiously applying Canvas. That will be a futile for the university that they invested several millions of money. And this might be a disruptive thing if the teacher does not practice. In other words, in the academy, our innovation of the fourth IR, it's not just AR, artificial intelligence, that's so broad. We are just going to the basics of innovation in the teaching profession. And again, as I mentioned, I think there are only 3 or 4 universities all over the Philippines has Canvas. And that is a big, big advantage for FEU students where this is really maximizing the innovation of technology. Some may say disruptive innovation. Some may not say about disruptive innovation. But then again, it's always the bottleneck here is the students' advantage. And of course, we teachers really have to shift our paradigm and make a change. Unless, if you don't change, we will be shaped up or shipped out. In other words, innovations in teaching in the academy is more important now. Even if you're 45, 50-year-old, you really have to embrace innovation in FU using Canvas as a tool for technology advancement for the students' benefits.
Thank you. Follow-up question to the use of, it's a learning management system, yeah, LMS. do we lose something? Because you're applying it to the Institute of
Tourism.
Tourism, right? Do we lose something in the learning process? Because we're teaching students in terms of hospitality, and a lot of times it's a skill where you have to apply emotion, you have to apply, you know, human touch, and when you are required to submit work, academic work through a platform which is electronic, do you experience, I mean, what is your experience? Does student lose the human touch through that process, or it doesn't affect it?
Okay. For the elements of Canvas that we're using in FEU, as I've mentioned, we teachers are allowed to have a 3 meeting absence inside the four walls of the classroom, where we can talk to the students by using the internet and using Canvas. There is no really immediate effect of not having a physical communication with the students, because it's always, I mean, F is so innovative of dealing with the students' need today in terms of technology. We teachers really have to go and go with the flow and deliver what is necessary in terms of innovation. It's about changing our mindset. We cannot more complain. 10 years ago, we are not doing it. How come today it's not already accepted in our university? If you are with the university, you have to dance with the music we're playing. I mean, that is something that we are emphasizing in student engagements, whether physical engagement with the students inside the classroom, recitation, etc., etc.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ephraim, for that insight on the application of technology in learning setting. Yeah. Now let's move to Sir Wilson. You shared with us earlier today about medical tourism. Yeah, about medical tourism. Now, what sort of innovation do you bring into this into the tourism and hospitality industry through medical tourism? Is there any technology that you bring in, or any other innovation that becomes contribution of medical tourism into the hospitality and tourism industry in general?
Well, for the healthcare industry, who is the main mover of this medical tourism, it has a balance also, both for state-of-the-art innovation and, of course, sustainable innovation in TLC, or the tender loving care on the human aspect. Because for the medical tourism experience of innovation, we have a lot. Of course, the healthcare industry is one of the fast moving cutting edge advancement or innovation in terms of equipment. But again, we cannot replace human. Even though robotics are also in the industry and trying to make some disruptive innovation in the healthcare industry, but it is not that popular. Because who will entrust his life to a robot? No? Especially for cardiac operations. I will never entrust my life. But through the years, you know, the disruptive innovation in medical tourism is making the process easy. Because if you're going to read the journals on the healthcare, the best practices today is for hospitals is making the process easy. So for our experience, patient from Ghana will just email us, and then we will email them back, and then we will ask them to, in advance, email to us their laboratory results taken from Ghana hospitals. And then we in the hospital will just email an invitation letter that they're going to show to the immigration here. And after arriving here, they will just have a validation examination. And we have a story. Here's a 65 years old wealthy man from Ghana. He has an enlarged prostate, a high sugar. So to make the long story short, he has to be brought here in the Philippines on a bed. But after 1 month of his stay in the hospital, he's running to the airport. So the disruptive innovation in medical tourism is result-based. It is always result-based. It has to be what's next, or what is the effect to the patient. Thailand is number 1 today because of the transplant. If you want to have a female organ, the result must be good. If you want to have a male organ and you are a female, it must be functioning. So it's a result-based industry. So no matter what kind of innovation, either sustainable or disruptive, at the end of the day, patient or medical tourists will look for the result.
You mentioned about the innovation that you had taken is in terms of improving the processes, yeah, because to be able to bring people from abroad easily, seamlessly, coming up with an efficient process is important. What about payment scheme? Because people living overseas have their own health insurance coverage, etc. What innovations do you apply, especially in MAMS? If you can share your experience, how do you integrate your medical services with insurance coverage from abroad? So that people don't have to bring money, but they are covered by health insurances, etc.
As for PNG and Ghana, because of the anti-money laundering law of the Philippines, they cannot bring a lot of money. So the card payment is very much easy. But for Palau patients that we have, the Minister of Health of Palau came to our hospital to sign a memorandum of understanding that all the patients that they cannot handle in Palau, just bring them here in our hospital, and whatever balance that they will have, the government of Palau will do it, will shoulder it. So we have nothing to fear in receiving patients from this island state in the Pacific, which is Palau. So credit card is a good system.
What about health insurance programs coverage in other countries? Let's say if I come from the U.S. and I hold let's say Aetna health insurance coverage, how acceptable is it for me to come here, go to your hospital and show you the card? Is it acceptable? Do you accept it, or what is it in that landscape?
For that landscape, we haven't experienced that yet. I don't know with JCI hospitals if they have international agreement. But for our case, we are not yet. But for denominational worker,
Okay.
because our church is a worldwide church, they just email us a letter of authorization from your financial officer, either from Africa or division in the Middle East, or that is easy.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think last question, Dr. Swansea. What tips would you share with us if you have any? I mean, we have students here who one day would be, may actually be an innovator already. What tips would you give them in terms how to be an effective innovator? You know,
Okay, tips on how to become an effective disruptor.
disruptor.
You know, number one, you need to see where the present business incumbents, the market leaders, are actually losing out. There is a tendency for market leaders in any industry to offer premium products or premium services to the elite of the market. A disruptive innovator is not aiming at the premium market. You know, if only the rich from Ghana can come to Mamsi, then it is not disruptive innovation. You are still operating on a traditional model where you're offering premium service. Disruption happens when you create a simpler product which is cheaper and which is more accessible to the mass market, not to the premium market, to the mass market. And you know, this is our social responsibility. Why should only the top premium market enjoy the benefits? You need to create a product which is cheaper, which is simpler. You take out all the frills. You know, AirAsia is a pure example. And I like the slogan of AirAsia. What is the slogan of AirAsia? Now anyone can fly. I mean, it makes it so accessible to anybody. Who, if you can ride a bus, you could ride an airplane. You know, that's the concept. So disruptive innovation is when you create a simpler, cheaper, and more accessible product or services through innovation, number one, through a distinctive business model. Your business model is so unique that you're able to do it. Lastly, by tapping a non-existing market. Like, see, traditionally Mamsi has a local market, right? Now you are tapping on an international market. So that is an element of disruption. And so this is how we all can become disruptives. In fact, today I would say that if you're young, I see all of these young people, you can take on the present market leaders with little resources, very little resources, few resources, very little capital, by creating a business model that can take on to the world. And actually the world now is waiting for the next disruptor from any one of you here.
Dr. Swansea, you've been expressing how you admire AirAsia. It's not because of the Indian guy, right?
He is successful partly because he has some Indian genes.
Indian genes, okay. All right, one more last. How can our young people here develop that innovative, disruptive, innovative mindset? Because you don't just come up with it. Just just don't fall out of the sky. You know, you develop it.
Yeah. Dr. Ephraim talked about the mindset. You know, you have to come out of the syndrome that only people with capital can do business. Let me tell you, you need really nothing other than a good business idea to do business. And changing of the mindset is that you can actually become the next disruptor with only armed with an idea and a business model. That actually costs you nothing. And you can take on the world leaders by these simple strategies. A good business idea, good business model, and perhaps the guts to take on a present incumbent business leader. You don't need courage. You just need to have the courage and have the guts to take on anybody who's there out there in the market.
Let's give the lady and the gentlemen here a round of applause. We thank you all for your contribution today. So we're gonna give this to the MCs for the next program. Thank you.